Hello, hello, hello. Cool, we are ready. Are we ready also there in the back? Yeah? Great. Hi everyone. How are you feeling? I'm feeling amazing actually because this is our first event after a while with public. So a big applause to you for being here. Today we have all the measures, obviously, so super happy to have you here. So applause to you for coming and joining us today. How many of you are people from corporates or established companies? From startups? Students? Okay, it's a mixture of everything. Others? All of you. Okay. What a time we are living right now, actually. It's amazing to see all the changes that we are seeing in the world and all these unprecedented times we are currently living. Here in Berlin, we have actually a good situation right now, thanks God. And I would like to send a support message to the rest of the world who are having difficult times, especially in South America, where I'm from. But before we start, first introduce myself. My name is Thomas Eichhorn. I'm program manager at BIA, Berlin Innovation Agency, and also running different activities for Smart City Hub and in Smart City activities. And also a big thank you to our partners from the Smart City Hub, also to the Factory Berlin for making everything possible here tonight. Also to my wonderful team in the back and also by live streaming, and also to you here by coming in person to this event, and also for the people that are joining virtually. So we are live streaming via YouTube, and we have many people from all over the world also with us in a virtual way. So today we have a hybrid event, a special one. We created the mixture between online and offline. We have offline, what we see here, very obvious, but online we have the live streaming via YouTube. Afterwards, for the networking, we will open the Zoom call, where all the attendants can join the Zoom call, and at the same time we have our Miro board, which is an interactive platform where all the people that are attending, all our audience, can join us and collaborate with us. So we created this board, which is people can post questions to our panelists today. At the same time, they can do their predictions on how will Berlin look like in 2022, and at the same time, brainstorming and ideation session on what are possible ideas for the current crisis. So super happy to try new things and to innovate, and we do everything with the purpose that we have in our company, which is from BIA, a better world needs better organizations. And we truly believe in that, and we try to create that in all our programs and the trainings that we create. And this is what we do. We are an entrepreneurial agency creating entrepreneurial programs for both established companies and also for mid-size and small companies, especially here in Berlin. Our programs are from trainings based on leadership and innovation, agile leadership. Also, we run different innovation programs on entrepreneurship or innovation sprints, and also organization development. This is everything about new work, change, and bringing agile methods into companies. And today we are here because of the Smart City Hub, which is one of our main activities and main programs, where our aim is to bring together different stakeholders from the Smart City ecosystem. So what we do is we create synergies between startups, corporates, city stakeholders, tech companies, universities, public services, we bring them all together in different event formats, ideation workshops, and also co-development of pilot projects. We have more than 1,000 guests in our events last year. At the same time, we have received more than 100 companies in our innovation workshops. And at the same time, more than 5 digital pilot projects between our partners, where we created a collaboration between partners, established companies, and tech companies. And at the same time, we are running our Future City Incubator, which is our startup program, where we have right now 8 teams in the first batch of the program. And this is our hub. Right now, we are growing. We have many companies, one side from the partner side, which are the members of the Smart City Hub, and on the other side, we have our startups. Some of them from the incubator, others startups we create pilot projects, and we are growing. We are getting more people, more companies, and our aim is to continue building a great ecosystem here in Berlin around the smart city. And this is one of our key topics that we are working right now in the city of Berlin, which is our Future City Incubator. It's a startup incubator where we run through these 3 main pillars. First of all, the incubation program, which is based on venture development program, and we give the teams the knowledge with masterclasses, boot camps, and also with mentoring, so they can be ready to go out for the market at the end of the program. At the same time, we give them equity-free funding for 8 months, and also office space here in the factory Berlin, which is one of the most, the best ecosystems that we can find in the city of Berlin in startup scene. And at the same time, we have the smart city integration also with our partners from Berlin Partner, Factory Berlin, and our Smart City Hub. This program is backed by the European Social Funds and the City of Berlin. And if you have some ideas or you know someone who wants to innovate in the urban sector, stay tuned, because we are opening our second batch at the end of this year. And this is what brought us today here, because we have seen so many changes and challenges right now in all the sectors, industries, but absolutely in the city, because here is where innovation normally happens. And obviously some person or some companies could say, okay, this is not the time to innovate, but we strongly believe that this is actually the time to make changes, to innovate and to adapt to the new scenarios. And that's our focus for the upcoming season of the Smart City Hub. So our corporate members will join us and experience the development on how we can change the cities for the next couple of years. And that has a lot to do with this word resilience, right? Resilience is normally taken for psychological perspective, but we can also use it for things, for cities, for example. We define it as the capacity of adapting well in the face of adversity. And that's actually what is happening right now in all the cities all around the world, where we have big challenges. We had the challenges also before Corona, and now we have other challenges that got on top of them. So this is in what we are working right now. And this is why we are here today in this event. So we asked ourselves, how will Berlin look like in 2 years? Because we could also ask, how will Berlin look like in, I don't know, 2050? Everyone will say, okay, the cars will fly and like very crazy things, but it's not that graspable if we ask, how will it look like in 2 years? And I think these are exactly the actions that we can take and that we can innovate right now and see the results maybe in 24 months. So today we have amazing speakers, experts on different topics. And from our side, we can talk about resilience, but we really wanted to give the input from different industries, from different experts, from bigger companies and smaller companies, And I think the speakers that we have tonight are amazing, and we will have a lot of input on this. So very shortly how it will go. At the beginning we will start with a small keynote from each of them with the inspiration about the cities of the future. You can then ask one question on a Q&A session, and after that we are moving to the panel discussion. So first of all, I would like to invite on stage Simon Höher. He is lead at the Hybrid City Lab, which is a public design unit of an innovation company called 0360. And Simon already founded 2 companies in Berlin and London, and his background is in technology, culture, society, and global context, as well as he's a mentor for young companies. So, welcome, Simon. I also would like to invite on stage Thomas Kraubitz. He is a strategic partner and urban designer and architect with a strong focus on resilient environments. So he has also experience in integrated development planning. So he's also a very good speaker for tonight to get more insights about this. So welcome on stage, Thomas. I would also invite on stage Emil Greber, his senior consultant at Joshua Fisher and Company. Emil is a public affairs and communication expert with special focus on digital and mobility as a service. He has experience in that area and also with a background on political communications. So welcome on stage as well. Also joining us tonight, Ozan Yilmaz. He is project manager at AVA. Ozan is project manager there. It's a company focusing on security, and he has experience on innovation and digital-driven businesses. And he has worked for large companies, for public sector, and also startups. So also welcome on stage, Ozan. I would also like to invite Carolina Granja. She studied economics, and during her studies, she focused especially in the economic policies and public economic policies for cities. So also welcome on stage, Carolina. Last but not least, I would like to invite virtually to the stage Natalie Thier. She is consultant digital transformation for the department at Bitkom, and she will join us via Zoom. So I think you can. There she is. Big applause as well. So yeah, we can start with Simon. The stage is yours.
This on? Great. Hi. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you very much for having me. Is this working? Nice. All right. Yeah, I'm very looking forward to actually dive into the discussions because I don't have that many answers, but many questions with me. Yeah, I'm Simon, working at the Hybrid City Lab. You already mentioned that. We're basically working with urban organizations to create fair and livable places in the digital age within, but also well beyond the city. Urban organizations mean anything from public institutions, local governments, to private companies, and even civil sector communities, NGOs, and foundations. And in our work, we basically ask 3 questions, which is, what might the future hold? How do we get there? And what did we miss? Because usually we leave things out whenever we have this kind of ideas about the future. Usually we have these blind spots, and I like this kind of settings to hopefully point out each other's blind spots. We'll see how that goes. So yeah, the question of how would Berlin look like in 2022 was interesting. The short answer is I don't know, but I think it's okay. We really believe, obviously, the future, we don't know it. I think probably if we ask ourselves how will the world look like in just 2 months, earlier this year, we would have different ideas. So 2 years already is far away. I think what we can speak about, though, is what ideas do we have today about how the future might look like, because I agree that might point us to some directions. So what we kind of did is we talked to a lot of public servants, to people working in local governments, in city governments, but also in NGOs, and asked them how they deal with the current scenario and what they expect to be seeing. And what I brought with me are a couple of basically theses how things might turn out. Maybe, hopefully, we'll see about this. And I'm just sharing them. I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts about that. So one thesis would be to be seeing cities turning into something like curators, basically. So that is becoming something of a matchmaking role that kind of selects, supports, amplifies, and even funds all kinds of diverse ideas to tackle like everyday and real-time problems from the city. So literally vetting them and actually instilling public trust to ideas that come from a diverse ecosystem. Which definitely changed the role of public administrations as we know them today. The second kind of thesis would be to be seeing something like basically dealing with the pre-existing conditions that we already have in our cities, from inequalities to really underfunded, I think, public services. I think this might not necessarily entail this kind of sexy techie innovation projects, but really the long and maybe really kind of dire discussions that we've had for decades. I'm thinking of rethinking economic models that we have in cities, as Amsterdam is already doing, which is now looking into Kate Raworth's donut economics, closely linked to degrowth and really questioning global capitalism on a city level. But it also has to do with, I think, the discussions that we have recently seen around inequality, not just addressing them symbolically, but hopefully systemically. A third thesis would be to be seeing something like a public recapture of public infrastructure. I think if anything, COVID has shown that there already is kind of a digital layer to the city. This is the first event, but the city has been going on for the past months as well, but it has been happening on the digital kind of side of things. And it might be interesting to see kind of the city and the public city to understand digital tools. I'm not just talking telephone lights, but also kind of ways to connect as existential public infrastructure, just as streets are today. And 2 more, and I just throw them out briefly because I'm already seeing a light somewhere. Another one would be to see city coalitions. I think we're seeing lacking trust in kind of global governance institutions like the WHO, but also the future of a re-emerging nation state might not be too promising for some. But what has been happening is that there are many kind of best practice communities coming from cities and from urban planners and practitioners in cities, like the Eurocities network, for example, which I think is interesting. And the final one is obviously if social distancing is the new normal, that would thoroughly question ideas of real estate, but also I think in the long run, maybe not in the next 2 years, maybe like 10 years, even ideas of global labor and migration, and we might really challenge or kind of renegotiate the urban-rural divide. As I said, more questions than maybe answers, but I'm looking forward to discuss them. Thanks a lot. This is mine.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon, very much. We will continue with Natalie, who is on the other side of the screen.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Hi. Yeah, so I'm sitting at home at my desk. I'm really sorry about that. I was ill last week, so it would have been probably quite irresponsible of me to come to a crowded room since I haven't had the chance to get tested yet. But fortunately, we have modern technology, so here I am. Yeah, thank you first for having me. I'm very excited to get the chance to share my view on the future of Berlin, a city I deeply care about and that is my home. So yeah, let me begin. So like every other panelist, I was asked to predict what Berlin would look like post-corona, so hopefully in 2022. So I thought that's not very far in the future. That's basically the day after tomorrow. So the question I then asked myself in return, why would it look any different? Won't we just go back to normal? And then I thought, no, please, let's not go back to normal. Let's learn from the crisis and build a better solution for the future. So that's what I'll try to do, and I'll try to share my point of view on the future of transportation in Berlin in the next couple of minutes. So the pandemic has taught us a lot of substantial lessons, I think. A lot of positive ones, of course, but also it has also exposed some weak spots in our transportation system, and it placed a finger in a wound that, in my opinion, was already there before. So when I say wound, I mean that the crisis has exposed a very patchy landscape of mobility solutions in this city, because what did most people do when they couldn't jump on the U-Bahn anymore? Well, in the best case scenario, ecologically at least, they jumped on their bicycle. In the worst case, they drove their own car everywhere. Public mass transportation and shared transport modes were the last resort, since they were allegedly the most unhygienic and therefore unsafe ways of transport. And this in turn set us back years in the evolution of our mobility system. And then I asked myself, why wouldn't there have been a way to make these transport modes safe for people to use and not having to go back to individual transportation? And I think, yeah, there would have with modern technology. So I believe that technology and digitalization could have helped us out quite fast here for a short-term solution, and not only for the short term, but also in the long run to build a more resilient ecosystem. But let's first take a look at the short term. So where can technology help out for quick solutions that can be implemented right away? So I just said that people were quite reluctant to use the metro over the past couple of months, right? Me included, to be honest. So in this case, a quick technology-based fix would have been to use software, or artificial intelligence, if you will, in order to reach a balanced utilization of public mass transportation that provides people with a safe mode of transport, right? Because let's be honest, we do have all the technology and data we need for this. So how does this work? Well, software can basically create simulations of different scenarios like rush hour times or many people with bikes on a train, or even a scenario of crisis. And that based on these scenarios, the software then generates a solution on how to avoid overcrowded metros and how to reach the ideal train sequence. So for example, you could have shorter trains with less people, but higher frequency of train connections. And on top of that, the software then analyzes the ongoing travel activities and displays them in the metro station or in the BVG app. So next time you think about taking the U-Bahn, you can just check which wagons are crowded and which are less frequented, and then just choose that one. So that's basically one technology-based solution for the short term. But then what about the long term? So in the long term, I think a resilient city has to have three characteristics. It has to be socially inclusive, it has to be eco-friendly, and it has to be digital. And for transportation, that means mobility solutions, it have to be smart, shared, and intermodal. So they have to include all sorts of transport modes. So looking at the shared and intermodal part, I think Berlin is very well placed to become a trendsetter as a resilient city. But about the smart part, not so sure about that. And we still need to work on that. There has to be a structural change in that. We have to connect all these transport modes we already have in the city to combine it to one large mobility ecosystem. And we will only get there by using data and technology, right? So there is a solution for this that has been discussed for years now, that's a mobility platform. And the idea is pretty simple. You just become a member of a club, and once you're in it, you have access to a variety of transport modes, and you can book, pay, and use them all through one interface. And that, to me, creates a resilient mobility ecosystem. Why is it resilient? Because it gives you access to different types of vehicles and addresses needs of all age groups and frees up spaces in our cities, and it costs significantly less of what a car would cost you.
Natalie?
Yeah.
Sorry. We are already in time, and we need to move to our next speaker. So.
Sorry. So let me just finish up with one last line.
Of course.
So what will Berlin look like in 2 years? I think, to be honest, there won't be any groundbreaking innovations in terms of mobility, but what we can do for now is to upgrade our existing mobility system with modern technology to make it more accessible and efficient, and then eventually more resilient.
Cool. Thank you very much, Natalie. So we will do the conversation with Emil. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Does this work?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty much agreeing with you, Natalie. That's not the best basis for discussion, and I even don't know what Berlin will look like in 2 years, but in the preparation of today, I made up some thoughts, and I think they're so interesting I even wrote them down.
All yours.
So, yeah, as you already mentioned, I'm a senior consultant at Joschka Fischer and Company, and so I'll focus mostly on political issues today. Normally, I have a strong focus on mobility issues as well, but to make it a little more interesting, I try to talk more about politics as usual. Yeah, as I got only 5 minutes as you as well, yeah, I think just talking about the near future in 2 years, as always, prediction is difficult, and especially about the future, even if it's just in 2 years. But the 3 thoughts I made up for today is like the first one. It needs a crisis to leave the beaten track. Why is it like that? What's shown to be most resilient are our habits. As Natalie just mentioned, we stick to our cars if the crisis makes us to. And what we do is we act individually and collectively in ways that we know from before. So this is quite challenging for all of us. This is not just about mobility, it's about digitalization, which is the key to have a new access to new mobility. It's we learn to work remotely. This is quite new to us in Germany because most of us are not used to this like now. And I think what is most important, the first thought is that crisis is an accelerator for the good or for the bad. It depends on what we're doing with it. The second thought I just made up today was I think we need more creative drive. We need to shape the change, because what we saw is that politics spent billions and billions and billions to save the economy, and now we need to do something about it. We need some creative drive, as I just said. Political measures have to come with steering effects. What does this mean? This means if you spend millions and billions of dollars, or euros in this case, you have to take the chance and not give it to the car manufacturers, but build something new, new ideas, build something resilient, and just don't make your bad habits resilient as they were before. New measures should be supporting sustainability, of course, mobility transition, and just make smart cities more resilient, because mobility is like the key to smart cities, and as I see it, are key to how we move and how we move in future. Which is clear is that future is not a bus on a fixed route that sticks to his timetable, but is something that sticks to the needs of everyone who wants to move through a city. If you want to have real alternatives should be speaking for themselves. Means we need some new funding policy that concentrates on the needs of the people. This means not just the people of cities, but of rural areas as well, as they also have interests in moving far beyond the own cars. And what I perhaps can add to was what Natalie just said. In my opinion, new solutions should be, first of all, seamless. This means bike sharing, ride sharing, scooters, car sharing, even carpooling, car sharing. Like I just said, they should be seamless in one system. Like, I get the light. The third thought is just 2021 will be an election year. As you all know, it's not just Berlin elections, it's federal elections as well. And that makes it even more complicated to think about what will happen in 2 years from now. Last sentence from me. I think what will be crucial in the next year about the elections will be not to forget the people in the rural areas, not to forget the people who don't live in the city of Berlin or in the center of the city. And I think you have to take everyone with you to find a solution for everyone. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Emil. I'm going to the stage with a bit of drinks because I think they're needed. So. And actually, we are right now a bit resilient as well because we thought we will do a Q&A session at the end, but I will split it. So right now we have already 3 speakers, and then we have the other 3, and right now we can do a very short Q&A. So does anyone in the audience have a question to our 3 main speakers? Not yet.
What is the criteria for applying to a job being an ideas guy? Just like when you haven't been studying the whole thing, but you know what it's about, and you have great ideas that maybe just light a fire, not just like, oh yeah, we do that, but just like imaginative. You know what I mean?
You mean like what's a possible platform or?
When I have an idea, where do I go to?
Maybe a question for the first speakers?
Well, I can answer on that. Yeah? I mean, just when I look at my colleagues, yeah, doing it right? Okay, so maybe let me answer on that one. Yeah. So in general, you need to have passion, and you have passion just with the question you raised. Yeah. So if you go somewhere and you said you want to make that change, you bring that energy and the passion, then definitely you're at the right spot. And if you're going somewhere and saying, well, I have an idea what I can offer you and what I can bring in, then you're also at the right place if people accept that. So I wouldn't wait there and out there. I think we're over the time where you're looking up for, posts for jobs or saying, oh yeah, maybe there is something. You're all, and at the beginning you were asked whether you're a startup. Everybody here is startup, whether you're established or not. You have to reinvent what you were doing before, and you have to reinvent it day after day. So that's the right time, and that's exactly the spirit that we need in Berlin, saying you want to do something, you want to spark things, and you want to bring in the innovation. But you just have to figure out where your true passion is and what you really want to drive. And then you find a place on doing that. And that's a great thing of Berlin. I think nobody, just to bring in a few facts on Berlin, yeah, most people you ask in Berlin, what is your job? Nobody can explain it in a very simple sentence. Yeah, everybody has to say, well, it's something like, yeah, and starts. So that's a great thing I love about Berlin, that you don't get so simple answers on it. Yeah, you have to find that spot, and I'm quite sure in Berlin you can do, and I think all of us here have that feeling that it's a time for innovation, and it's the right generation now when you say you want to do something, you're in the heart of your use, and you can do all of that things still, and you're flexible and mobile. That's the time for it in Berlin.
Thank you, Thomas. I would also like to ask a question to Emil. What is your forecast, or how would you see this transition of people living in the city to more rural areas in the next 2 years?
I think with more and more people going to the cities and cities get more crowded and crowded, infrastructure just pulls back from the countryside, and this leaves a gap which can only be filled by new mobility solutions, or can, for example, be filled by new mobility solutions, because the ways to get to local infrastructure get longer and longer, and you have to have something which is not your private car for many people, and it's easier to bring mobility to the people than the whole infrastructure, like doctors or local facilities.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it actually, the idea came from kind of a quite interesting discussion we had from someone from the city of Ghent in Belgium, who's working in the local government and was dealing with how do we as a city respond, especially in the early days of this current pandemic, how do we even respond to? There were so many initiatives coming up from the civil society, people were posting stuff on Facebook, new Facebook groups would actually open up, and he was telling us how they literally kind of went through those different initiatives to figure out which are actually good ideas that we should amplify and which is just the noise that we have to filter out. And he was actually, this is not my idea, we just kind of tried to extrapolate it, but he was saying that they kind of felt like this kind of curation role taking suddenly place, because they would actually connect ideas that come from wherever. As I said, can be a startup, can be just a bunch of people, a neighborhood coming together, and connect them to the relevant resources that are addressing similar issues within the local government. And at that point, they become this kind of interface between the kind of the urban society and the public administration. And I kind of felt this was an interesting general shift of how even an administration sees themselves. It's kind of selecting what is interesting, what is trustworthy. I think trust is a very relevant thing here. And how do we connect it and amplify it so others can actually make use of it? I'm not sure if that explains it a little bit more. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Simon. We move to our next speaker, Thomas Kraubitz. The stage is all yours.
Perfect, thanks a lot. So great being here. Just want to put one thing in there. Bottom line, we all love Berlin, yeah? We're here because we love Berlin and we want to shape the future of Berlin. We want to be part of it. Yeah, be Berlin. Let's see if we find a new slogan maybe even for what's out there. I'm quite intrigued with two terms right now. One is Renaissance. It's an old-fashioned term, and you don't see it so much nowadays in the media, but there might be, especially when we talk about cities, a Renaissance. It was brought up actually already before. Physically, if you ask me as an urban planner, urban consultant, it won't change much, yeah? Just by numbers, 98.2% of Germany are built. So it's not much that you're gonna change. If you look at the duration of projects, yes, they're even longer than political cycles. To put up a building takes you 3 to 5 years, whole neighborhoods even more, because they really need to get spark of life and all of that. So we're talking of a time span of about 5 to 10 years if you really want to change something in a city in large scale. So we first have to deal with what we have. Yeah? Renaissance I bring in because we have to see what's actually happening in public space. Somehow, and my wife keeps telling me you should, just think about how much sugar you take or not take. So we need to think about a sugar-free city. And we said, just think about a cupcake where you have some cream on it and you have a nice cherry on top of it. Wonderful things. But that's maybe the past. Yeah, we don't have that anymore. Maybe we now find really the pleasure and the fun and also the delight in just the cherry. Maybe we don't need the cupcake, maybe we don't need the icing or the sprinkling or all of the other nice things you could do. And we have to think of our city being that. We have to get back to a pureness of a city when it comes to what is essential, what do we need, what are the base components. And that means there might be a cherry, there might be an orange, there might be an apple, there might be everything else. And there's strawberries and other things you just don't see. And at the end, when you compare it with your cupcake, you say, oh, that's so much healthier, it's so much better, it's so much more resilient, and all of those things come in. When we talk about future as well, and I had a great conversation with a colleague yesterday about future, and we said, well, actually, if we look back the last 3-4 months, what happened there? And for me, one of the most amazing films, I think, and where I'm a big fan, is A Time Machine, not the remake, the original. And also, if you look at, Popular Mechanics and those things, everybody's dreaming, what is a time machine? What would I do if I could travel 2 or 3 years ahead, What could I do? And so actually, the last month showed us that, especially when it comes to our everyday life, we progressed. We know for 2 things we know for sure. One, we know we can work remotely. In my organization or so on, we have, I was surprised because from the first day on, it really worked. And I have a colleague right now sitting in New Zealand and one in Ankara and one in Vienna that are normally all in Berlin. And it works. Technology allows us to do that. They are part of it. They share the same jokes with us when we have our meetings, and it's all fine. We have a lot of hybrids. It's a great thing of Berlin right now is that we're able to do that. Where we're meeting physically and in person, but we really need to see that as actually already being a time machine 2 years ahead. Because just think about all of you that are not originally from Berlin, how easy or hard it was to pay by credit card in Berlin, When I think of my time in the US, you could buy just a soda, you can pay by card. In Berlin, it wasn't really possible. And the last months have shown, well, it is possible, and people really like it. They see the benefits and the ease of what we can bring into the city. So the other thing, just to see about what the city is, we need to find the USPs again, the unique selling points or maybe unique sustainability points, whatever you want to call it. But why do you want to be in a city? What is the reason, the very reason for being? Because now we can go outside of the city, and you're not limited by by underground lines or S-Bahn and saying, well, that's actually where I'm going because I have to travel in and out all the time to the city. You now can easily be out and you say, well, I travel to the city maybe once a week or twice a week. So you want some more freedom on doing that. And actually that needs to get us to rethink the boundary of Berlin. I just read it somewhere, didn't find it, but Berlin is the size of Hamburg, Munich and Frankfurt together, just by the physical space. If we now look on the last 3 or 4 months, what Berlin means, it even got bigger, and that's not just physically, but also in the digital world. So that's just for you. You're also changed. Biggest thing you need for the tool of the future, just brought it to you, the Sharpie. You have to sketch up things. You have to be quick. You have to get your ideas across. Don't spend too much time. We do a lot of great energy modeling and fluid dynamics and people flow and all of that, but you need to have that initial idea. And you need to get it on paper, you need to tell people about it, and then that's how you can change the city and how you can make a future for it. But we already see it 2022, 2023. Let's just see what's out there in the next 10 or 20 years and how we can shape that together.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Great inspirational talk. Do we have any questions from the audience for Thomas? Not yet? Yeah?
I think mobility is highly linked with the development of density. And also I was thinking about it when you said about this link that is between urban and rural. My question for Thomas is how do you see that this density is being developed in Berlin, especially after these times of Corona? How do you see that is going to be in the future?
All right.
Can I shortly reproduce the question because our audience on the other side can listen to you. Your name again, sorry? Stephanie asked, what is your perspective of how the cities can develop on the more dense cities becoming to more dense cities in the future?
All right, actually for that one, yeah, if you look at Berlin, yeah, it used to be bigger, not bigger, but denser, yeah, especially when you look at like early 20th century and so on. So that's a density we don't want to get back to. I also see that the density we were planning for is maybe not appropriate anymore. So we have to rethink, and we have to think about how can we make that happen? What do we get from external side, and what do we have within the density in the very neighborhood? What we figured out is it's a neighborhood itself, like finding our bakery, you know, just for daily goods. We're more connected, we know how fast or how far we can travel and are willing to travel to get to the bakery and shopping by foot. That's one of the things that we learned the last few months. So I think the understanding of the real neighborhood, or in Berlin the Kiez, is much bigger. And if we get that and we say we don't have so many faraway trips anymore, that might help on it. But definitely, that's a topic to discuss. What is a density that goes back to the planners, that goes back to the legislation, that goes back to a lot of things. But Berlin in general, we don't have something like Shanghai, even I love it, yeah, but we don't have that density. And there is a few spots where we have it, but overall Berlin, if you look at Wings of Desires, that film, you see that we are quite equally distributed densities. And so I assume we're not going to change that really. We just have to see how do we really go into public spaces, how can we make them usable, and how can we reflect housing needs, and you know, how can we be ready for the changes to come? And I'm not talking about a second or third wave, but I'm more talking about climate change, and that's going to also influence the density. But in general, a density is where people come together, where you have those coincidences, yeah, where you run into each other and say, well, there's ideas. So that's the great stuff we want to have also in Berlin. So I hope we're not decreasing it too much, but density is something to look at, definitely.
Cool, thank you very much, Thomas. We will move to our next speaker, and then we can ask more questions at the end of the session. We will continue with Ozan Yilmaz, his project manager, growth at Ava. The stage is yours, Ozan.
Check. Hello? Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Ozan, project manager at Ava. Artificial intelligence and data fusion platform here out of Berlin. And yes, I read the thesis, I would say, of a post-pandemic Berlin in 2022 and thought about it. And I didn't actually agree with this if I understand post-pandemic to be a state when we actually you know, past this crisis from a medical standpoint, you know, thinking about vaccines to come up and the typical life cycle of those, and actually vaccinating people, that usually takes more than 1.5 or 2 years. If I understand post-pandemic, even in economic terms, I would even argue that this is a much more severe process and crisis that takes longer, you know, thinking about the city and the public budgets to spend thousands, millions of euros to save companies, to save people from losing their jobs, leads to probably overstretched public and city budgets at record highs, in combination with actually less spendings of people. You know, unemployment rates are rising, less tourism, all of these things. Actually don't make me think that we will reach a point of being post-pandemic in already 2 years. However, if I take this thesis as it is and you know, think from that standpoint, I think Berlin up until then, you know, basically starting from now, has to apply or, you know, implement a different approach on how it actually knows about things happening in its city. I'm talking about having situational awareness over everything related to public safety, security, and risk in general. So everything that is of interest for you as an individual or as an organization, as a city, a public transport operator, basically a city that has kind of, yeah, you can think of it as dashboards giving them all kind of insights, you know, outbreaks in the city, outbreaks in specific neighborhoods, public transport usage data, the density at large public spaces, if demonstrations are taking place during these times. even data coming directly from you, from all of us, reporting into this kind of database if we feel kind of sick or something like this, or if there are outbreaks in the companies that are part of the city of Berlin. All of this would basically be the base for making best informed security related decision making in a city. Just an example to give what dimensions this could have. Think about sewage data, which is a bit ugly and nasty, but if you would only take samples from wastewater that we obviously have a lot in this city from different parts of the sewage system, analyze it for the amount of, I don't know, coronavirus in this case in it, you will probably find that you will probably be able to trace back from certain neighborhoods where maybe in, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 10 days people will get sick because you can already see it in the wastewater. And those kind of approaches, you know, to work together with water companies, local water companies, would probably be an approach that actually make a city resilient, would embed its residents as well, you know, providing them with a Berlin app where I can report and put my stuff in case I'm aware of something in my neighborhood, and actually, yes, be a much more integrated approach, breaking those data silos that we have organizationally, you know, everybody, the police, the firefighters, the city hall, government officials, city officials work by themselves. But we saw that in such a crisis that doesn't make any sense. So eventually we will start with this soon, and enables us then to be actually, to reach this point of being, you know, post-pandemic, at least in a medical terms, up until 2022. Let's see.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Ozan.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience for Ozan? Not yet. Maybe later. Cool. Then we move to our next speaker of the night, Carolina Granja. She is part of our team as well as an economic consultant. So, Caro, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. Oh, that's loud. What will Berlin look like in 2022? No one really knows exactly today, but there are a lot of different scenarios. Some of them have been already mentioned or explained here before. Today I would like to focus more on tourism from an economic perspective especially, which has been the area of my study. Well, so for tourism, there have been already predictions that many businesses will have to shut down, and we already have seen that many small hospitality businesses did not survive the lockdown. The first scenario is that the things will sort of get back to its old, but is that something that we really want? As people in cities have been complaining about over-tourism, about air pollution, about the waste produced by tourism or by reduction of affordable housing. So we should think if that's something what we want, and then which leads to a second scenario that some cities have already adopted. Even before pandemic, they have started to adopt different public policies to tackle over-tourism. So, for instance, in the case of Airbnb or other housing holiday rentals, they made restrictions on the amount of holiday rentals that are allowed, or on the amount of guests that are allowed, or prohibited even Airbnb and other holiday or housing platforms to operate in certain areas. One good example is, for instance, the city of Amsterdam, which has been progressive in adopting such policies. they have limited holiday rentals quite strictly, so to prevent the misuse and to return apartment from the short-term rental market for the locals to the long term. As the city of Amsterdam it will become a first city to adopt the donut model, which has already been mentioned. And just to explain a bit, the model developed by Kate Raworth defines upper and lower bounds for cities, where the upper bound is the ecological boundary of the planet, and lower some like standard minimum living standards. So by adopting that, cities or the city authorities can use this opportunity for better future, to get the cities back for the locals, and also foster tourism where it's needed in the areas of economic disadvantage, and reduce it where it causes more damage than benefits. And by saying this, I would like to rather inspire or encourage public policies and cities to elaborate new policies such as the donut model, not to get in the old way of old businesses and economies, but rather to support local economies that are in a way more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caro. Also very interesting topic, and also related to the communities, right? And then how the local government can create new economic incentives into the local city. Do we have any questions from the audience for Caro? Okay, not yet. Good. So we can move to our next part of the conversation. Before that, we would like also to invite all the people that are joining us virtually to join the Zoom call. So it's already opened. You will find the link in the invitation as well as in the Miro board. So you can just join us and to have a networking session also virtually. So having said that, we can move and present our moderator of the next part of the conversation, also a friend of mine, Andrew Green, who will lead the moderation of the panel discussion. Andrew is the founder of WunderTree. It's a circular economy startup creating trees, Christmas trees, to being delivered in the city of Berlin, creating a circular economy. And also very important, Andrew is part of our first batch of the Future City Incubator. So that is more important to be here. Andrew, welcome.
Oh, Thomas, thank you. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for the folks online. Please throw up your questions on the Miro board. Yov is up the back in the room and he's sending questions to me, so I'll ask questions of these guys. Also, the lovely folks here in the crowd, thank you for taking the respect of one another to keep your space. It's very funny to look at you all sitting in rows. But you can also submit through Miro if you don't want to put your hand up and yell out over the top of anyone. Submit through Miro. And we'll ask a few questions. Thank you for the lovely presentations, everyone. It was very insightful. I got a bunch of ideas already. Now it's time to put you on the barbecue. First one. So we got pretty deep in I guess the philosophy of the areas that you work on. But let's bring it back to the humans for a second. Let's take a bit of a step out. I give you a magic wand, a Harry Potter wand. And this is a question from the crowd, not the Harry Potter part, but my addition. if you could make one initiative in Berlin in the next 2 years, which is going to really improve the quality of human life in the city, what's it going to be? We won't run across all of you, but if there's someone that's got something that they'd just love to make happen, is there something that you'd just slam it out? Emil, I put you on the spot.
I don't actually know if it's one single solution, but I would start spending every euro I gain from individual transportation and spend it into public transportation, which does not mean having the public transportation system we have right now, but have an enhanced one, a better one, one that is focused on the demand of every Berliner moving in the city, moving out, moving in between, and creating so much new space for living in the city, creating so much new opportunities for like enjoying your city in a new way. I think this would be something that could bring benefits to all of us.
Okay, and Thomas, you said before it takes 10 years to change the city, really make a change in the city. If you could do it in 2 years, what would you do?
Well, the physical thing takes really 10 years, maybe sometimes less. But what you can immediately do is, and I'm sitting in quite a few of juries and committees on developments currently happening in Berlin, public participation. Yeah, you can go there. Reality, when I go there and I'm sitting on the other side and you see it's people like in the 50s, 60s often enough, but the young people are missing. It's you're missing, it's a generation that really wants to bring the change, but it also really is the next generation, kids, high school. So if I would bring up something, it's getting the people from schools that are currently, let's say, middle school and above, to say, well, you're actually the people that can change it, because when we talk about 5-10-year cycles, it's them that are in, and we don't empower them. We're not going to go to schools, and we had great programs from the FU Berlin on going to schools and telling them, you are the change makers. It's not really happening necessarily in our generation. It's a good one. We're planning it, we're implementing it, but it's the next one we have to bring in. So initiative one would be getting people public participation, going there, taking part. Initiative two, to bring in a program to public schools in Berlin. It's good to have a laptop and all of those things and need it, but to really tell them you're bringing in the change, and that's something that I would like to see.
Okay. Is there anyone? Oh, Simon.
Yeah, maybe to kind of underline that. There have been, especially in terms of public just participation, but also like public decision making. I think I like this format, as I said earlier, because whenever we take this kind of bold ideas, we usually get these blind spots and we usually miss out on other things. I think governance in general is always a matter of trade-offs. Actually, this is one. I think we can also ask questions, because I have a question for you later. Because I liked your scenario, but again, it felt to me like, okay, but what about all these other things like privacy, for example? But we'll get to that probably in a second.
we can jump into it.
But the one kind of initiative or tool that I wanted to point out, it's been already kind of rolled out and active and developed also partly with public funds in the city of Barcelona. It's called Dissidem, which is basically a public kind of decision-making platforms for kind of local issues, community issues in cities. And there's currently kind of a little bit of a kind of open source project that is adapting and translating that very tool to the city of Berlin. Which is also publicly founded, by the way. And I'd like to see more of these kind of civic tech, open tech initiatives that not necessarily pose all the solutions, but actually provide a space, and preferably a digital space, to even have this discussion in a more informed way that is not necessarily a political one, but really one that is guided in a way that people not just share opinions, but actually needs, and we get to come up some kind of collective action, maybe at the end of the day.
Let's go to our audience in the room with us. Throw your hand up if you're satisfied at the moment with sort of the access you have to decision making or contributing to it in society. So do you feel like you have access to governance at the moment? Or yeah, put your hand up if you're satisfied. Put your hand up if you'd like more access. There we go. We've got a full room. So definitely, I mean, we've got a primed audience, I guess. But people are very interested in it.
just maybe one of the reasons might be, yes, that it needs to be fun. And often enough, those processes are not fun. Yeah, it's, it's announced somewhere, it's quite formalized. So, and, we're developing with the German Development Corporation, we put out a game of zones, yeah, a game for really bringing in urban change. It's 550 cards.
Is the pun intended?
Sorry?
Game of Zones, was it intended?
Game of Zones, it was intended. Our client in India came up with, we love the title. But the idea is you have 550 cards and you can bring up topics and it's wonderful. We do it in schools, we do it in universities, we do it with clients. It's great. People just like it. And that's the thing we need to bring in. It needs to be fun. People like or need to be really with their heart on things and like to contribute, and sometimes it's a fun part, but also really the access and the format. You're right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be physical, but it needs to really talk to the right audience, and that's not really happening.
Okay. Oltan.
We pick it up that point. I very much like the idea to interact more between the residents and the city, and you see the feedback. Obviously, there's too few communication in that. Just a simple thought, an app, I mean, we like an app for actually the people living here in the city, providing us with the most relevant information for us. I don't want to run into a huge whatever demonstration that might take place, or I might give a feedback to the city hall and communicate back how I feel in terms of, perceived safety. It doesn't necessarily have to be like factual, but things like that, to actually have a way of communication, because I personally don't think that there is actually such a way present for young people like us. So we've seen how fast an app can be developed. I think in a couple of weeks the government pushed out something like this. It's not too hard to do. I think that can be one way. Everybody has smartphones. It's pretty easy.
And in terms of building these dream ideas, if we can get to this point, I want to go to you, Kara. Also, it's kind of a question from the audience through Miro. Where's the money going to come from? We've just, the money printers have been on burr for the last couple of weeks. But in the next 2 years, if tourism drops off and the city's taking less revenues in taxes, economies are slowing down, where does the money come from for us to build this new future?
Money to invest, you mean where it comes from?
Yeah, where like, if our economies are slowing down, how do the governments get the money without just keep printing more money? Are we going to have to start looking at different business models, or are we just creating ideas that aren't going to be fundable?
Yeah, we should redefine the business model, diversify them, and invest more in local economies, because we see that certain tourist business models are not sustainable. As for instance, holiday rentals, you can see it has at the moment high risk of, it's not profitable in the long term. If it's illegal, because the state is not giving these packages right now for illegal rentals, but rather for hotels. So we should redefine, or these economies should be redefined.
You're touching on housing there. I'm not sure, Thomas, if you wanted to jump in, but another question kind of from the audience, and this might be towards you as well, Simon, is about equity with housing. What can happen in the coming years to make sure that as our city, whether it gets denser or less dense, that the housing situation becomes a bit more equitable for the citizens currently in the city and future citizens?
It's a big question. Maybe touch a bit on those pre-existing conditions that I mentioned earlier. I think housing and access to kind of affordable housing, especially, of course, in Berlin, but also in many other cities, is, I think, a huge problem that has been around for way longer than Corona. And I think there are, of course, approaches to tackle them, especially when it comes to equity. I think kind of housing collectives are seeing this kind of new interest. I know of a very interesting initiative actually in the Netherlands that tries to tackle this partly with tech again, to see how we can kind of connect new housing collectives actually generating equity for people to be able to kind of live in them rather than to invest in them, and connect them to the financial sector and industry. But I think the solution to this is probably only remotely a technical solution. I think it has a lot to do with like not just regulation, but also with a lot of kind of complicated things like power dynamics, interests, actually collective action again on the political kind of guide rails that we put in place. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things probably to be said about housing. I'm not sure we get a quick fix to that. Maybe on a general note, I think we, especially when it comes to apps, and we've seen it with the Corona app and others, I think over the past maybe years, we are kind of used to, first of all, starting a company real quick and then having a kind of an app in just a couple of days or months. And then if it doesn't work, we get this quick fix. I think when it comes to cities, maybe that thinking is not that well placed. To think of quick fix and to think of, well, move fast and build things and it's going to be all right. It's a public space. That means there is not necessarily an opt-out. I cannot just decide to not use that street, but I can decide to maybe not use that app. So I think that kind of mentality that we are kind of used to from the tech side is not necessarily something that I would kind of just kind of throw over how we now think about the cities. I think there's more at stake than just a broken app.
Just to add on housing, yeah, it's a very big topic in Berlin, always been. You could see housing like a bouquet of flowers, yeah? So there's so many different options. There are some that are more commercial, some that are more social, some that have to, there's so many different parts. All of them are needed in a certain way. What we need to look at, and that's why I'm talking about Renaissance, we need to look at how can we use maybe office spaces that are not maybe needed anymore. How could those become housing again? How can we allow housing in areas that was not yet done? Yeah, a friend of mine has housing on top of a production building, quite interesting. So you need to make it, like coding is a topic. We need to look at that, and that doesn't come at cost. It's just about getting informed decisions and saying, well, there are locations where we do allow housing, yeah, and in the city, densification is still there, yeah. We have a lot of untapped potential in Berlin for housing, but on the money side, also on your question, what I think is fundamental, we never have anybody saying, well, whatever it costs, we're going to do it. We don't have that. So we're talking about cost and benefit. Whatever we do currently and also in the future and in 2022, we need to see what is the cost for it and what is the benefit. As soon as the benefit is above the cost, you said that's maybe something to do. And all of the other things, all of the luxurious parts, we might have to leave out for a little bit. And then we might get there to provide more housing. But housing shortage, it's a never-ending story, and you could do very long events. There are great examples on projects in Berlin currently happening.
I want to jump to Emil here. I think he's got something.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the question of supply and demand, just what you said, and beyond all regulation, it still is the question of supply and demand. But I think you could ask why everyone wants to live in Berlin right now. This wasn't sure at always in the past, and this is something that developed. And perhaps you could also ask why do they want to live in Berlin and not somewhere else? Because obviously, there's something in Berlin that they don't find somewhere else, and perhaps you can ask how to empower other cities as well.
Okay, so this reminds me of your LinkedIn page, Thomas. I think you've got this photo of beautifully or like just shaped islands in a sea. I'm guessing it's Abu Dhabi or Dubai or something, which makes me think. Berlin's already been an island for a long time. It's a landlocked island. Is it going to become even more of an island now, which is the reason why people are moving here, because it's an island within Germany and kind of an island inside of Europe?
I think it has more been an island in the past, actually.
At
least
borders,
the western part.
but by a philosophy and way of living, it feels like it's definitely still an island inside of Germany.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in terms of Ireland, there's a photo I have. It's a project in Kuwait where actually there is a land reclamation in a salt desert. where you're saying you're making spaces habitable that weren't used so far. And in Berlin, we've done that, yeah? On all of the corridor where the wall used to be, we used that, and that was a smart decision to do that. There's a lot of conversion area from former railway corridors, yeah? If you look at Gleisdreieck Park and so on. So all of those things are very important, and they also came with housing alongside, and so as part. No, Berlin is not an island anymore. I think there's a lot of islands, so many islands that you have a carpet of islands, you could say, and where mobility kicks in, and it's really connecting those dots, those carpets, in a smart way. So kind of archipelagos situations that might be there, but still there is certain gravity. However, in Berlin, we have at least 3 city centers, maybe more, and that helps us that also the sub-centers and the Kiezes, they're all small little islands, and that's a great thing to have, yeah, and that's part of identity. So I wouldn't say that's not good, but the city is growing anyway out there, as I said, like with people being able to work from home. You know, you don't have the commute issue anymore, and so Berlin is getting bigger to a way where you think, all right, how big is it gonna be one day? How close does it get to Potsdam? Like that corridor is also an important one to look at in future.
Simon, there's a saying, at least I've heard in Berlin, which is Wedding kommt. And it's like, it's going to be the next suburb that blows up and people move there, and it's the next Kreuzberger Neukölln, and apparently it's been said for 15 or 20 years. Is it going to become Eberswalder kommt, or Nauen kommt, or Zossen kommt? Is that what we're looking at as people can start working from home and this desired mobility system kicks in?
Maybe just one quick thing, because I know this situation from the other side route. Just wanted to point out that Natalie is still with us, probably somewhere in the digital world.
I just
see her in a very small image picture over there on the screen.
I've got a message that's saying that she can't join through audio, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure we don't kind of...
Yeah, I wanted to send out a question to Natalie. I didn't want to leave her just dragging there.
Hand signed or something.
Unfortunately, she can't join through audio for some reason, the message I've been sent.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, yeah, I don't know, of course, but of course, I never know things. Just ask the questions.
What questions do you want to ask about Eberswalder kommt?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, to once, and I think there's still a huge trade-off, as we can see, between digital and physical experience. Perfect example. And I think it's far from being on par to actually be sitting here or being in an office or having a meeting with a client or going to a conference, then dialing in. I think even over the past months there have been, quite interesting new apps popping up again and breaking again. But I think it's still a long way to go, even to then go beyond conferences and maybe think of education, for example, or all kinds of labor that is not just people asking questions. So I think it's a long way to go still, but
what would it take you to move there? What would it take you to say, choose Berlin?
I think we will get there, that, at least it's in hope, that the trade-offs won't be that hard anymore between digital and physical. And then I can really imagine that this, I think, century-old development of urbanization and of this rural-urban divide that's deepening might even be at least renegotiated. I'm not thinking cities will kind of go away, but I think there will be new kinds of cities. A few months ago, we had a very interesting kind of research project with Wikimedia, and we were looking at the similarities of how something like Wikipedia resembles kind of a city. Like, what are the parallels that we have in terms of communities, in terms of spoken and unspoken rules, in terms of kind of little pathways and shortcuts, how you get from one kind of section to another. And I think these kind of analogies, to think of digital places as new kinds of cities that are absolutely not physical, but still have this kind of patterns that we can kind of see emerging, I think that's quite interesting. And I think if they don't have this huge trade-offs anymore, I could see myself maybe moving away sometime. But I just moved back to Berlin, so I'll stay a little.
Very shortly, but we have Natalie back again. So
awesome. Okay. Hello, Natalie. Hello, Natalie. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Ooh. Yes, we can all hear you now. Very loud and very clear. I have a question for you, Nathalie. There's been a lot of chat tonight about mobility, but it seems to mostly be about personal mobility. Do you have any opinions about the mobility of resources in the city? So if many more people are staying at home and getting deliveries of all different types, we need to get resources around the city. And very often you find these traffic jams of white Hammies and DHL vans in the suburban streets. What's going to happen with mobility there, and what needs to happen?
If you're asking me in 2 years, looking at 2022, probably not much. Looking at the next 10 to 20 years, probably a lot. So what will happen, I think, is that we will get a more interconnected system for not only delivery, but also, in terms of moving around goods and people at the same time. And now comes the famous thing to say as a mobility expert, it will all happen autonomously. I think the more we move towards the future, the more autonomous cars and delivery systems we will have that are interconnected with the infrastructure that can communicate to one another, and therefore, for example, avoid traffic jams. And then also, hopefully we'll have a lot of more bike lanes and people just driving around on their bikes, which will also hopefully be connected to the cars and be much more digitalized.
Okay. Thomas, I'll go to you in a second. Again, we're very deep on this mobility theme. Are we going to need, let's talk about environment for a second. You can throw in what you wanted in a moment, Thomas, but we haven't really spoken about the impact upon cities and the environment and nature. I'm curious with anyone's thoughts around autonomous vehicles. Are we going to see more and more need for more roads? We're going to need less roads. And does that give us back public space, or does it take away from it? And then how does that affect nature and our access to it? Emil?
I think studies show that we'll need less roads because actually right now private cars are moved 1 hour a day. So this means it's ineffective as hell. So the more you get to cars that are shared or autonomously, the more you can come to a system that will work very, very much better than right now, because we are losing so much place right now. We create so much congestion, traffic jams, and I think it's one of the most ineffective systems we have right now, owning a private car.
Ozan used to work at Deutsche Bahn with autonomous vehicles, correct?
I used to work at Deutsche Bahn, not anymore, but my perspective is very much the one that you just mentioned. I think one of the biggest part of congestion is also the search for parking spots. And if you just automate that part as well, which is actually not a big thing, then you would definitely have much more space on the roads.
Is this not, yes, I imagine you can get more space on the roads, but sometimes I feel like we put so much attention into solving certain problems that actually make driving a car easier, which doesn't disincentivize driving a car. So for example, I think the laws are changing in Berlin or Germany to allow carpooling in bus lanes, as well as cycling. And that seems like a smart idea to encourage people to carpool. But then that takes cars out of one congested lane, spreads it across two, makes it easier for single passenger cars to get where they want. Why would I stop driving a car if suddenly it's much easier for me to drive? Same thing with parking. If it takes me 40 minutes to find a car park, like I hate returning a car share car after 9 p.m. in my area because I can't get a park.
I agree. And I think, yes, I think solving problems down the line is, feasible and it helps, like looking for a parking spot, sure. But I completely agree that like the root cause, in a way, like the higher level problems are trickier to solve, but definitely have a more promising impact. I think it's quite interesting to see what's happening, for example, or the discussions that are happening, for example, in Paris. I think there the mayor has kind of at least floated the idea of, correct me if I'm wrong, was it the 15-minute or the 20-minute city, 15-minute city, to even come up with a way to have all essential things that you need for your everyday life in a kind of radius of 15 minutes to reach. And not by car, 15 minutes, but actually either by bike or even walking. So from shopping, groceries, to education, to your work, to your housing, even to like, obviously not an opera house, but maybe like bars and restaurants, everything that you would basically need at least available in a radius that wouldn't even incentivize you to use a car in the first place. I'm not sure this is the one way to go, but I think this is, again, the right set of questions to ask, like, why do I even kind of want to set up a city for cars? I mean, it's a decade-old discussion. Why did we design our cities? Like, how did it even start? And we know how it started, that we designed our cities for cars rather than for people. And Paris, again, Barcelona with their super districts is another example of how they do this. I think there are ideas and there are like long-term strategies in place that even definitely go a couple of layers higher. And I think that it's harder to do, but it's definitely more promising than solving kind of, yes, no, it's a parking spot, then it's, I don't know, recharging your electric car, and then there will be another one.
Okay. Thomas.
That's actually getting back to your question on the island, yeah, because that's what you have, yeah. So the question is, how far do you want to walk? Yeah? And just over the last months, what we have from sustainability consulting, you normally say it depends on really the culture, but you're saying 300 to 500 meters is acceptable. Everything above that you would use some other mean of transportation. So if you have those islands where you say that's your radius, that's your hood, that's your keys, and all of my daily needs I have there, you're right, you're reducing a lot of the need to travel, and you would only goes into another island if you say there is a cultural island or there are specifics that do get you to go there and maybe not on a daily need. So that's maybe one thing, but just also on what's possible in 2 to 3 years, yeah, in mobility. If you look at the e-scooters, 3 years ago wasn't a really big topic on the streets, and within short period of time everything changed on there, where you say we need to find space for them, they are good, they are bad, there's a lot of topics about that, but that's just to show you what's possible within 2 or 3 years in mobility. Yeah, it's so look at so small interventions. There might be something smarter than that to come, but there is a potential for it. Yeah, and maybe with the small islands and knowing exactly where you want to go and what mobility needs you have, I think that would already help.
Cara, have you anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, for mobility also, like, it's really, now is the time we have the potential to really make the changes, and we should not oversleep it in a way. For instance, with bike lines, so many cities drew new lines, but it's still a question of how many of them will be kind of deleted and how many will stay. So in some places they said, or the local authorities said they will keep them, but yeah, like you said, if you make them away, then you will again come to the old situation where you make it easy for cars, and that's not healthy for the cities, as we saw, or sustainable.
Another question through Miro. So, we've got a question here in front right before I go to the one in Miro.
It has nothing to do with the traffic. It's more like when we are living in an age where everything is digitalized, where everyone is having a smartphone, and it feels like we as the citizens of the city, basically creating the city in itself by being the inhabitants. Why is it that we don't have the feeling of influence, of participating in the government? So I thought about, what about a state where it could...
So is it a question or is it a statement?
It's more like about the idea of a state that's based on crowdfunding, that you pay the taxes directly into what you want to choose to be built, like a democratic way of...
Okay, we might. I think we might come back to this question towards the end. I just want to go on to this one with Miro, but thank you for submitting. Yeah, we can do question. We'll do another 15 minutes of questions offline very shortly. Yes. Okay. Around the state and assets. This is a question come through from Miro. It says, how do we make sure that the future developments or innovations go hand in hand with politics supporting? Take, for example, social living enabled rent staying affordable for everybody. Then the government sold these flats in Berlin because they were broke. So the system failed here. How do we prevent this or help companies or help companies be incentivized? So I guess the question here is like, how do we make sure the city, I guess this comes back to housing really, in terms of resilience. How do we protect the city into the future? Especially if we get back public space, for example, if we start using fewer roads, how can we try to protect the city and make sure that some of this newly claimed public space doesn't end up getting sold off because the city suddenly needs to pay for everything?
I think that the case that was mentioned in the question is an interesting case, I think, of widely accepted policy failure in Germany over the past decades when it comes to public housing. And there are many cities in Europe, Vienna, for example, that managed to do that right. And Germany, I think, especially Berlin, but generally Germany failed thoroughly, which led to, at least it's my kind of personal opinion, but it led to a situation that we have today where we have this kind of many privately owned housings. I think the question is, how do we prevent that from happening? It's a question about democracy, I think, not necessarily related to urban planning, but to the many challenges that we face when making democratic decisions. For example, I don't want to go too far into the theory, but this has obviously to do with the cost and the expenses that arise from actually providing public housing in a competition to a kind of a private housing market as a state actor. I think what's maybe more promising, maybe to throw that in, is that maybe we try to rethink that strict barrier between public and private a little bit when it comes to investments. I think there's this very, very interesting take on how this is actually more connected than we think. Great study in the book by Mariana Mazzucato, The Entrepreneurial State, that shows that many, many public funds actually went into all these kind of famed innovations, from the iPhone to all this kind of AI developments that we have today. So it's not this clear-cut gap between, well, we need this new private enterprises and startups on the one hand to make innovation, and then there's also the state, but it's actually public funds, if you kind of trace that back, that lead to many of these interesting new innovations that we have today. And I think maybe a more promising take to this is to rethink this strict barrier and more understand this as best case scenario, more of a synergy, and not say, well, is it public spending or is it private investments, but more like, how are these things more connected than we might think, and how can we also kind of reap the benefits of both sides more? So actually reaping publicly the benefits of private investments more as well. So that's maybe a twisted answer to a complicated question.
Yes, yeah, very complicated question. I'm not sure, how much time do we have left, Thomas? We've got 5 minutes left. Okay, we'll start getting towards wrapping things up. Before we do, has anyone from the audience got another question that they want to throw out? One here, lady here over on the left.
Yeah, you mentioned the theme of green space a little bit already.
Phoebe? Yes.
I was really interested in the topic also of green space. I think many of us here are embedded in the cause of the green spaces, and I wonder, like, what more can be done to give value to the public green spaces that we have. I live next to Bluestone Park, and I feel really powerless of controlling, how it's managed, etc. I mean, I'd like to do more, but I feel like I don't know how to do it. Andrew, you work on green
Okay, so to summarize, if I've got it right, what can we do as citizens of the city, and I guess all levels of the city, to enhance the way public spaces, especially green spaces, are used? And I guess we're looking in this sort of 2-year time span. Thomas looks very excited about this one.
No, I love that one, yeah. I mean, one thing I'm missing in Berlin is that some parts, I'm always thinking, because our office is also very much connected to the UK, where you have in London, you have a Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. Yeah, so specifics we need to bring in. So every park, and we have, if you look at Berlin, it's the greenest capital in Europe. I think it still is. Yeah, and there are great initiatives. Just on the weekend, I've been on Mauer Park on the new editions. So there's a lot of great things happening, but we need to bring in a uniqueness to all, so each of those parks. There are some parks in Berlin nobody really knows about, even the name, and they're wonderful. So it's finding that very unique topic, and especially when you're in a neighborhood and you're living there, and you say, okay, that's maybe something for outdoor yoga classes, or when I lived in China where people were riding with water on the roads, and it's a real happening or something. Yeah, just I think as a citizen you can go, you can bring in your ideas. Yeah, you can play, you can put in games, you can just use that space and make it very unique, so that people know, all right, if that is one of the activities I like to do, that's the park I go for. Or that's something very kind of the uniqueness, the idea. When you bring that in, that's something you can immediately change. And there's great examples also in the Netherlands how parks are really used. But try to not be a regular user and just saying, well, it's generic what I do there, but just try to find what would make that park better for you, and how could you bring those activities to the park. So, always in the limit of what's allowed.
So what you're maybe saying is it's always better to beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission.
Yes, okay. In a certain context, yeah. But just try it, kind of take it and say, that is my park, because I like to have, just as an idea, like Tempelhof. When you look at Tempelhof, people with kites, you always see kites there. And it's a great way to do that, and a great spot. Even there are a lot of things at Tempelhof that didn't really work out the way they were planned, but those things do work. If you're into kite flying, you go there. And maybe at Dewberry Park you say there is something unique. It can be, just by previous functions. It can be by user groups, whatever it is. But so we need more of those things where really unique parts are happening in Berlin, and that's helping maybe.
It sounds a bit like what you were talking about with the Sharpie. Just get it out, draw an idea, make it happen. Natalie, do you have input on this? How do you think we can better use green and public spaces in the coming couple of years? How can citizens take part and make changes happen themselves?
So I think, first of all, it starts with yourself, right? So we don't, first of all, need to look at public spaces, of course, but look at just right in front of your doorstep, right? Look at your balcony and look at your roof, what you can do here. I just moved to a new apartment, and we started an initiative to do roof greening here. So basically we just planted a lot of grass on the roof, which is great for insects, which is great for climate regulations of your building. And I think that's a way to start. And then I agree with Thomas, who says that there are really great initiatives in Berlin that you can just be a part of. One of my favorites personally is the Domäne Dahlem. I don't know if you guys know it. It's in Zehlendorf, and it has basically permaculture. It's a public space that you can visit and you can learn about ecological agriculture. Okay. And that's pretty cool. You can be part of that, and I think visiting it and going there and being a part of it is great. But start right in front of your doorstep.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more question before we have to wrap things up, and I'll throw this one as an open question to all. How do we build back better in the next couple of years? Build back better. So we've things have slid down, stopped, got quieter in certain ways. There's going to be things that close and shut. What's the sort of mindset, attitude, or strategy our audience can take with them and think about building back better inside their company or the organization that they're working for? Ozan.
Well, I guess the policies currently that we have are doing a pretty good job in trying to keep those people in the job market and make them actually feel valuable. You know, eventually come up with even smarter policies to transfer them to other industries that might have, you know, a longer future than I don't know, the many you know, the cultural industry or event industry, those kind of areas that kind of collapse a little bit. There might be initiatives from the city even to come up with programs. Yeah.
Emil or Thomas, you interested to take this?
I mean, just, you know, as an architect, yeah, you always say less is more, yeah? Just try to find out what's important and focus on those things. There's a lot of things, just mentioned the cupcake with the icing and the cherry, or it's a cherries that we want to have, yeah? And we want to have more of those and also those fruit gardens. Think about those, try to reduce and also come up with new uses. There shouldn't be any building unused in Berlin. There shouldn't be a site unused. Try to come up with an idea, and if you see something and say, well, there's some, and I like what you say, like with a roof garden. If you say your roof is available and it's a space for activity, and you know, you're putting plants there, it's great for a lot of things. So just try with the little things to change those if you can, but then also think about what is really important and focus on one or two things at the beginning, and that's maybe something to go ahead. Less is more, and try to pick really the cherries and bring them to the city.
I think that's a nice way to wrap things up, guys, and it's making me hungry as well. Focus on the, to our audience online and here in the room, focus on the cherries. Great advice, and always think about that cupcake. Just focus on the best part and get those things done in the next couple of years, and let's build a better Berlin together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to all of our guests. Round of applause. Thanks to our audience here. Thanks to the audience online. Thomas is going to wrap things up and then join us for a bit of a chat and networking, of course, at a 1.5 meter distance. Thomas.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much to all your speakers. I invite you again to your chairs. Thank you very much. Once again, a big applause. I think they deserve it. And also, thank you very much, Natalie, for joining us virtually.
Thanks for having me. Have a great networking, guys.
Thank you. Great. How do you feel? Everyone still activated? Nice. Yeah, I wanted to still invite you. We are, as I said at the beginning, we run meetups like the one we are right here, but also ideation workshops based on the design thinking methodology, where we put a specific topic in the room and we bring different stakeholders together. So this is an invite-only event. If you want to join, send us an email, hello@smart-city-hub.com. And this is the invitation for the ideation workshop on the 29th of July about PropTech. We will talk about the future of the property real estate market, mainly in Berlin, together with our partners Fujitsu and Rama Process. So looking forward to it, and also looking forward to see some familiar faces in the event. Right now we come to an end, but before we go home with new inspirations and insights about the future cities, I want to invite you here to grab a beer and network all together on the offline, but also on the online. I encourage the people to continue talking on the Zoom conversation, and also very much looking forward to see you all in next events that we will do in the next couple of months, talking about resilience in the city. So thank you very much and see you soon.